Elvis Presley stood in a narrow office on a cold German base in 1958, the smell of metal and paper hanging in the air, sweat still clinging to the back of his collar. He had just finished a routine task, nothing memorable, nothing important, when a sergeant stepped forward and slid a sealed envelope across the desk. It was plain, off-white, official, Red Cross stamped in the corner. The kind of envelope that never arrived without taking something with it. The paper itself looked harmless. The silence did not. Elvis did not reach for it right away. Years of cameras had taught him how to keep his face calm even when his stomach dropped. The army had rules about composure, about order, about not being special. Fame stopped at the gate. Inside these walls, he was Private Presley, not Elvis. He rested his hands flat on the desk, felt the faint tremor in his fingers, and forced them still. The sergeant watched him closely, not unkind, just professional. Men in uniform learned quickly what certain envelopes meant. The return address caught Elvis's eye before he even broke the seal. Memphis, Tennessee. Home. And beneath it, a name he had not gone a day without thinking about since crossing the Atlantic. His mother. To understand why his chest tightened the way it did, you had to understand Gladys Presley. She was not just his mother. She was his compass. The voice that told him who he was before the world started shouting different answers. When money was gone, when doors stayed shut, when fame came too fast and too loud, she was the one thing that never shifted. Leaving her behind to wear this uniform had already felt like tearing away something vital. Elvis swallowed and drew a slow breath through his nose. Around him, the base hummed with distant footsteps and clipped voices, life moving on without permission. The sergeant cleared his throat and tapped the envelope once against the desk, the sound sharp in the small room. Read it, Presley. Before uniforms and headlines, before screaming crowds and studio lights, Elvis Presley had exactly one safe place in the world, and it was Gladys. She believed in him when money ran out and electricity got shut off, when neighbors whispered and relatives shook their heads. She believed in him when he believed in himself a little too much and when he did not believe at all. When fame arrived like a storm, she became both his shelter and his soft spot. She worried constantly, like the world was a thing that might snatch him away if she looked down for even a moment. That worry followed him into stardom and made leaving her harder than leaving the music. When the draft came, Elvis smiled for the cameras and shook the right hands. He said all the right things about duty and service, promised it would only be for a while, promised he would be fine. What he did not say was that crossing the ocean felt like cutting the cord that kept him steady. In Germany, the days were structured and loud, but the nights were quiet in a way that made thoughts echo. He wrote constantly, long letters, short letters, letters that said nothing important except that he was still there. He chased home through words and waited for replies like a lifeline. Sometimes he stayed up late, calculating time zones, counting minutes until it felt acceptable to call. Hearing Gladys's voice, even crackling through a bad line, slowed his breathing. It reminded him that the world still made sense somewhere. Then the tone changed. Her letters grew shorter, careful. She reassured him without being asked. She told him not to worry, which was something she had never done before. His father's handwriting started appearing more often, filling space where her words used to be. Elvis told himself it was nothing. People got tired. People got sick and got better. That was life. Still, he started dialing home more frequently, pacing while the phone rang, stopping only when the operator connected the call. On one of those nights, the base quiet around him, his heart thudding against the rigid calm of military order, the line finally clicked. A voice answered. It was familiar, strained, and wrong. It was not his mother. After that call, nothing came straight anymore. Information arrived bent and incomplete, like it had passed through too many hands before reaching him. A cousin mentioned, almost casually, that Gladys had spent some time in a hospital, then corrected himself and said it was nothing serious. His father's voice, when Elvis reached him, sounded thinner each time, stretched tight, as if every sentence had to be measured before it was allowed out. Answers arrived late, if they arrived at all. Elvis hung up feeling worse than before he picked up. On base, he did what he was expected to do. He showed up on time. He followed orders. He joked when the others joked and laughed when laughter was required. No one accused him of slipping, but inside, he was unraveling by degrees. At night, he reread the same letter until the folds went soft and the ink began to fade, as if the words themselves might change if he stared long enough. They never did. He started checking in with the unit office, pretending it was routine. Had anything official come through? Any messages? Any paperwork? Each time, the answer was the same. No, nothing yet. Come back later. Later became a weight that sat on his chest, heavy and unmoving. The army loved procedure, but procedure offered no comfort when the thing you feared lived between steps. Rumors filled the empty space. Someone said Gladys had been resting. Someone else said she had gone home. No one would commit to a version that held together. Elvis felt trapped inside a delay he could not outrun, forced to wait while something important was happening an ocean away without him. He counted hours, then stopped counting because the numbers only made it worse. He asked again about calling home and was told lines were busy. He was told to be patient. He was told he would know if there was something he needed to know. That sentence followed him everywhere, echoing in his head during drills, during meals, during the long quiet before lights out. If there was something he needed to know. The waiting hardened into certainty that something was being kept from him, not out of cruelty, but control. And control was absolute here. Then, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, a runner appeared at the barracks door, breath slightly fast, eyes already searching. "Elvis Presley," he said. "Headquarters wants you now." They put him in a waiting room and told him to sit. The room was small, orderly, and empty except for a metal chair and a desk that looked like it had never been used for anything human. Time stretched there, thick and unmoving, as if panic could be filed, stamped, and processed like paperwork. Elvis sat for less than a minute before standing again. He could not keep still. His boots echoed softly as he paced, counting steps without realizing it, trying to trap his breathing inside a soldier's rhythm. He asked to call Memphis. The answer came quick and rehearsed. "Hold for now." He asked about emergency leave, about a flight, about anything that moved him closer to home. Each request met the same response, delivered politely and without explanation. Waiting for confirmation. Waiting for orders. Waiting like the outcome depended on a stack of forms instead of a human life. Every answer felt like a door closing just before he reached it. Outside the building, the base moved as usual, but he could sense something shifting. Word traveled fast in places like this. He did not need to see a camera to feel attention gathering, curiosity pressing in from all sides. He kept his head down when someone passed the open doorway, aware that a single crack in his composure would turn him into something else entirely. Not a soldier, a spectacle. Inside the room, he forced himself to slow down. Panic would not help. Panic would give people something to stare at. He leaned against the wall, closed his eyes for a moment, and imagined Gladys's voice telling him to stay steady, to breathe. The thought almost broke him, so he shoved it aside and focused on the scrape of his boots against the floor. Minutes passed, maybe more. Time had lost its shape. His chest felt tight, like it had been wrapped in wire. Just as he considered asking again, the door opened. The sergeant stepped inside, face unreadable, movements precise. In his hand was the same envelope Elvis had seen before, the same off-white paper, the same Red Cross stamp in the corner. The sergeant held it out, not unkind, not gentle either. "Just final. This is for you," he said. Elvis stared at the envelope, knowing that whatever waited inside it would not wait any longer. Elvis broke the seal with his thumb and unfolded the paper inside. There were only a few lines, typed clean and official, the kind of language designed to keep emotion out. It did not matter. He read the words once, then again, because his mind refused to accept how little space it took to end everything. His mother had died. Gladys loved Presley. The date, the place, nothing else. For a heartbeat, he did nothing. Not because he felt nothing, but because he felt too much. The room was suddenly full of eyes, even though no one moved closer. He understood, with a strange clarity, that if he collapsed here, it would follow him forever. It would be whispered, photographed, retold. So he held himself upright, jaw locked, shoulders squared, and swallowed whatever sound was trying to come out of his throat. He folded the paper carefully and asked, in a voice that did not sound like it belonged to him, for emergency leave. He did not argue. He did not plead. He spoke the language the army respected. Calm, direct, procedural. He signed what they put in front of him, answered questions without hearing them, nodded at instructions he barely processed. He gave them composure, and in return, they gave him a flight. The journey home blurred together. The hum of the plane, the smell of recycled air, faces that recognized him and then looked away, unsure what version of him they were seeing. By the time he reached Memphis, he felt hollowed out, like something essential had already been buried without him. At the funeral, he stood rigid beside the casket, dressed in uniform, a soldier among mourners. People cried quietly around him. Cameras stayed back, respectful for once. When the final prayers ended and the crowd shifted, when everyone looked down or turned away, Elvis felt the strength leave his legs all at once. He dropped to his knees beside his father, hands clutching fabric, breath coming apart in sounds he could not stop. It did not last long. He pulled himself back up because that was what he had learned to do. The world expected Elvis Presley to stand. He did, but something that had held him together did not rise with him, and it never would again. Germany did not change just because his world had collapsed. The bugle still sounded. Boots still struck pavement in neat lines. Orders still came sharp and unquestioned. Elvis stepped back into drills and inspections like a man returning to a room after a fire, aware that everything looked the same and knowing it was not. Eyes followed him in corridors, not curious so much as careful. Men lowered their voices when he passed, as if sound itself might reopen something fragile. He learned quickly how to perform normal. He smiled when spoken to. He laughed at jokes he barely heard. He kept his shoulders straight and his hands steady because the army rewarded control and punished cracks. During the day, the structure almost helped. There was always a next task, a next formation, a next instruction to follow. Motion filled the space where thoughts wanted to gather. Nights were different. When the base went quiet and the lights dimmed, memory stopped waiting its turn. His bunk felt too narrow, the ceiling too close. He replayed moments he had never questioned before. The way his mother looked at him before he left. The sound of her voice on the phone. The last letter, the careful reassurance that now felt like a warning he had missed. Sleep became a thing that hovered just out of reach. After a few nights of staring into the dark, a medic noticed the circles under his eyes and the stiffness in his movements. The offer came gently, framed as routine, something to help you rest. Elvis hesitated longer than anyone noticed, then nodded. He swallowed the pills without ceremony and lay back, staring at the wall. The sleep that followed was heavy and empty, and when he woke, the ache was still there. Worse? Maybe, because now he knew he would need help to escape it. He hated that, hated the dependence, hated the relief. Days passed, measured in gray. He kept going because stopping was not an option. Then, one afternoon, a clerk stopped him near the barracks and held out a small parcel. Brown paper, string tied tight. The handwriting on the label was careful, uneven in places. His father's hand. Elvis stood there longer than necessary, the weight of the package pulling his arm down, knowing without opening it that whatever was inside had survived his mother. And that made it harder to breathe than anything else had so far. Elvis waited until he was alone before opening the package. He sat on the edge of his bunk, the barracks quiet except for distant footsteps, and untied the string with more care than necessary. Inside was something small and ordinary, wrapped in tissue paper that had been folded and refolded. It was the kind of thing nobody would think twice about, the kind of thing that only mattered if it had belonged to the person who held your life together. When he saw it, the discipline he had been clinging to finally slipped. He closed his hand around it and felt something inside him loosen, not in relief, but in surrender. This was real in a way the letter had not been. This had weight, texture, memory. He sat there longer than he meant to, staring at the wall, letting the ache spread without trying to stop it. There was no audience now, no formation to stand in, no reason to keep the mask tight. When he returned to the routine, people noticed the change even if they could not name it. Elvis was still polite, still cooperative, still capable of lighting up a room when asked. But something had shifted behind his eyes. It was subtle, the kind of thing only felt, not seen. He learned to carry it. He learned to perform over it. Years later, fans would argue about when Elvis changed. Some would point to the army, to the uniform and the discipline and the loss of freedom. Others would blame Hollywood, the pressure, the pills, the endless expectations. Some would say he was always fragile, that the cracks had been there all along. Everyone had a theory, because legends invite explanation. The truth sat somewhere quieter. He could still charm a room with a smile. He could still turn pain into music and make it sound beautiful. He could still give people what they came for. But the center never fully healed. The one place he had rested without effort was gone, and nothing ever replaced it. The legend says Elvis Presley stayed strong, that he endured, adapted, carried on. The cost was that he became very good at looking fine while holding something broken where no one else could see it.